Hey everybody, again this is my weekly video on Psych Life, and today I wanted to talk about the debate that's been going on for about almost a century, and it's the nature versus nurture debate. As you guys know, I try keeping my videos simple for all of you guys that aren't familiar with, too much familiar with psychology, but I want to review a few things about this topic. This topic can be explained very generally. It can also be, we could go in depth with it. So there's a few things we're going to review today. For one, we're going to review the history. The history of the subject and how it affects mental health. As well as twin studies. Twin studies are some of the best research we have in the field concerning this topic. So first off, let me make sure that everything's fine over here on this end. Okay, perfect. Okay, so first let's start off with the history of nature versus nurture. From Freud's time, they were already bringing up the subject nature versus nurture, but it didn't really get popular until about the 1960s. The 1960s was an interesting time because behaviorism started becoming very popular with Dr. Watson, B.F. Skinner. And what happened there was the behaviorist said that nurture was the way that we learned. It was through our experience, it was through our environment. Well, that was all great and dandy, but they were missing a big part of the equation, the genetic component. And let me make something clear. In nature versus nurture, it crosses many realms. It crosses the scientific realm, it crosses the cultural realm, it crosses the philosophical realm. And I think that the biggest mistake people have when engaging in this subject, it's going from one extreme to the other. Life isn't one thing. When you look at a client, you have to look at it through many different lenses. The case, and the client's circumstances. You just don't look at it through one lens. So whether we talk about nature, tends to be correlated with genetics, nurture with environment. So B.F. Skinner, like I was saying, he said that nurture was the main thing, environment was the main thing. So there was a guy his name was John Money in the 1960s. He was a behavioralist, and he started doing research on gender. It was very early times, and he had a theory. He said the person's gender was influenced by nurture. Okay, that's cool, but he took it a step further. He said sexual orientation was also determined by nurture. We know from today's research that that's not true. If the gender part, yes. If I were to tell, babe, today in society, blue is for boys and pink is for girls. If I were to have a little baby boy and I brought him up wearing pink, he would think pink is a regular guy's color. But we don't do that. What we do is we say that boys are blue, and we tend to put on, oh, look at that cute baby, let me put him on a blue shirt. And as time goes on, society thinks that blue, and the child himself thinks that blue is for boys and pink is for girls. That's understandable, that's nurture. But what's not understandable is for John Money, a behaviorist, to say, oh, sexual orientation is only influenced by nurture, nothing to do with nature. We know that's not true, okay? So there's flaws. I think the flaw comes when a person decides that one is more important than the other. And I'm here to explain to you today how it's both of them together that ties in to what it is. So how does nature affect mental health? Let's look at it. Let's touch that subject. Nature affects mental health because we all have genetic predispositions to certain illnesses or addictions. For example, my dad was a gambler. I know that if I probably go and gamble, that I have a higher probability of becoming a gambling addict. So I don't gamble. So I have a genetic predisposition, but it hasn't been triggered because I have never gambled. And as a matter of fact, I try avoiding casinos just for the sheer fact that I know that I am genetically predisposed to gambling. Oftentimes, we're all genetically predisposed to certain illnesses, whether they be physical or mental, but they never get triggered because we don't engage in that environment. And I think that's important to understand. So, for example, I have a client whose dad is bipolar. She now inherited, she was now recently diagnosed with bipolar. And they're blaming, the psychiatrist is blaming the genetic component. Okay, cool. And that's true, because it has been found through research that if you have someone in your family diagnosed with bipolar, whether it be 1 or 2, somewhere it's 4 to 6 times more likely that somewhere along the chain or somewhere along the family line, someone else is going to be diagnosed with bipolar. So you can see the nature and the genetic component. Let's put here genetic. But that is not always true. Just because my dad, like I said earlier, was a gambler and it's genetic, that doesn't mean I'm going to be a gambler. There might be some sort of genetic predisposition on my part, but not for nurture. But I haven't done any, not for environment. I haven't put myself in a position where I can become an addict. Gambling addict, that is. And as you guys know from my last video, I went over the stages of changes in addiction. So I hope you guys paid attention to that. Addiction is a perfect example. I mentioned gambling right now. Normally I talk about narcotics, but gambling addiction holds no boundaries. If you're genetically if your mom was an alcoholic and you know that, and you start drinking every other night, or you have a couple of drinks, not only do you have a genetic predisposition to becoming an alcoholic already because your mother was an addict. Now, if you engage in that behavior, now your probability shot up. Now you're more chances of developing that habit of drinking every day, which can lead to addiction. Okay, so that's why I always say it's not good to just look at a lens through nature, look at a client through nature, or the situation through nature, which is the genetic component, but it's also good to look at it through nurture. And that's that I'm touching very general, guys. I'm not trying to go into in depth for all you guys that are new to psychology. So how does nurture, let's talk about nurture. How does nurture affect mental health? Well, like I said earlier, we all have certain genetic predispositions, but if we don't engage ourselves in that environment that will bring that out, that genetic component, that heredity component out, then we're doing ourselves a good service. So let me give you an example. James Fallon, he was a famous neuroscientist in about, I think, the early 2000s, if I'm not mistaken. And he did a couple MRIs, CAT scans and stuff, and he noticed that his brain was very similar to those of sociopaths. So he realized that genetically his brain was wired to be a sociopath. But how come, or similar to a sociopath? It wasn't wired to be a sociopath. It was wired similar to those who have been diagnosed as sociopaths. And he wondered, wait a second, how is this possible? How is my brain similar to those of sociopath, but I'm not a sociopath? And you know what he accredited that to? He had a genetic predisposition to become a sociopath, a neuroscientist. And all of a sudden, it never happened. Why? Because the nurturing component was there. He says that there was no need for him to become a sociopath because in his family there was a lot of love, there was a lot of compassion, there was a lot of kindness. They were there for each other. So that genetic predisposition never was allowed to flourish. And that's so cool, for lack of better words. It's like both my parents can be basketball players, and I'm born. But if no one teaches, and I could have the genetic predisposition to be a great basketball player, I have all the talents, both my parents were high level. But if I never picked up a basketball, then those skills are never going to be touched. They're never going to transform. They're never going to be noticed. And that's how both of these correlate with each other. I'm going to continue with another one, how nurture affects mental health. This is a research, so I have to read it straight out the paper, guys. This is a research I wrote down. Research at the University of Liverpool recently found that while family history, so while genetics is important, it was only the second strongest prediction of trauma, depression, anxiety, bipolar, but the strongest predictor was nurture. So there's conflicting reports. In today's modern debate, we tend to look at everything scientifically. What can we prove for sure? What is concrete? And we tend to look at genetics, the cellular level, the molecular level. And scientists tend to miss out on the nurture. But that's where mental health professionals, social workers, teachers, we don't get to see all the time the science. Actually, we get to read it, but what we see is the nurturing part. We can see how a kid is what he is or how he's struggling reading because maybe the circumstances at home aren't good, and that's nurturing. One last thing, because I would like keeping my videos short, okay? Twin studies. Twin studies, why are they important? Because they were and still are the fundamental root of the source of information that we determine from nature versus nurture. Research has shown that if I get two twins from birth and they grow up in the same house with the same parents, same caregivers, they go to the same school, same environment, they end up having almost identical personalities, whether they be fraternal or identical twins. More often than not, the research shows they tend to have identical personalities, identical beliefs, and they actually feel closer to each other than they do to anybody else. But if I were to get those same twins, and that's nature, by the way, we can look at it through nature and nurture. Both of them being so similar, the twins, that's nature and nurture, both at the same time, because they're experiencing the same thing. But what happens if I get those twins from birth, identical twins, and I separate them? One grows up in one household, while the other one grows up in the other side of the country in a different one. What we tend to see is that there's similarities in personality, in genetics. That's just personality is part of genetics. There's similarities, but there's also differences. So we get to see firsthand from twin studies, especially ones that were separated from birth for whatever reason, whether just or unjust, they tend to be so similar. Same ideas, same way of movement, same way they stand up, but there's also a difference, and that was the nurturing component. And I think the twin studies tend to put this in a nutshell, and they tend to simplify this one. It's very complex, but twin studies allow us to give a perspective on how it's not just nature, it's not just genetics, or it's not just nurture. It's both of them combined. And I hope that's the point. I hope that reaches all of you guys out there. So oftentimes in undergraduate courses I've seen before, there be arguments for the genetic component, which is nature, because it can actually be proven on scientific paper. And while nurture only has correlational studies, which is studies that show association with certain events but don't mean causation. So I appreciate you guys, okay? I hope everybody has a great rest of the day. Take care.